This is a CBS News special report. I'm Maurice Dubois reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York. Good afternoon. President Obama is about to hold a news conference at the Pentagon. He's been there much of the afternoon getting a briefing on the battle against ISIS. We expect him to make an opening statement about that before he takes a number of questions, and there is plenty to ask him about, including the secret shipment of $400 million to Iran. Critics say the money was ransom for the release of 4 American hostages. The White House denying this. The president is sure to be asked about the election to succeed him. Mr. Obama said again this week that Donald Trump is not qualified. Margaret Brennan is at the Pentagon. And Margaret, the president turning 55 today, and you got to figure what better way to celebrate than meeting with reporters. Margaret.
Oh, yeah, getting peppered with questions is probably not how he wanted to be spending the day, but the president will be spending the next hour or so answering questions about that more than 2-hour-long meeting he just had with the heads of Central Command, the CIA, and other members of his national security team to discuss the fight against ISIS, which expanded this week to Libya. That's considered the most significant battleground outside of Iraq and Syria, and since Monday, the U.S. has already carried out about 9 airstrikes. You can also expect him to talk about the terror threat outside of that battlefield, particularly ahead of the Olympics, and many more, as he talks about as well. The campaign, 2016, the president has not been shy. He called Donald Trump this week unfit for office, woefully unprepared, and I can virtually guarantee you that in a room for a journalist, he will be asked more about that and perhaps what some of the national security team assess on that front. So the president has plenty of questions to answer. One thing I don't think he'll be highlighting is the failure this week of diplomatic talks to broker a peace plan in Syria. They had hoped to have some success to announce earlier this week, and that simply has not happened. So the president will likely also be asked about that recent alleged Russian hacking of the DNC and larger cyber threats as well. So there's a lot of foreign policy to be explored here, along with what's happening on the nuclear security front. Those comments recently made by Donald Trump expressing some willingness to employ nuclear weapons is something that I think the president will like to bite on, given that he views nuclear security as really a legacy issue for him, and he's focused a lot of money and a lot of effort on trying to nail down loose nukes and stockpiles of nuclear weapons. But as you said, that question of Iran and the nuclear deal he brokered there has opened up a can of worms recently when that report came out from the Wall Street Journal highlighting that it was a plane load of $400 million of cash that helped to close the deal, at least in settling some outstanding diplomatic disputes with Iran. So you can expect the president to get peppered here. So I think the more comfortable territory for him may be the domestic political side of things, talking about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, Maurice.
And Margaret, the White House no doubt has its eyes on polling numbers. The president's approval rating this week said to be 54%. Hillary Clinton said to be up by 10 points over Donald Trump. How are you hearing those numbers are figuring into the way the president is approaching this news conference?
Well, the White House really views the president as having a very strong hand when it comes to the campaign trail and perhaps helping Hillary Clinton boost those numbers a bit more. They've already said he's going to be on the trail quite a lot come October. He's about to head on 2 weeks of vacation. Here's the president.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just met again with my National Security Council on the campaign to destroy ISIL. I want to thank Secretary Carter and Chairman Dunford, who just returned from meetings with our coalition partners in the Middle East, for hosting us and for their continued leadership of our men and women in uniform. I last updated the American people on our campaign in June, shortly after the horrifying attack in Orlando. In the weeks since, we've continued to be relentless in our fight against ISIL. And on the ground in Syria and Iraq, ISIL continues to lose territory. Tragically, however, we have also seen that ISIL still has the ability to direct and inspire attacks. So we've seen terrible bombings in Iraq and in Jordan, in Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Afghanistan, attacks on an Istanbul airport, a restaurant in Bangladesh, Bastille Day celebrations in a church in France, and a music festival in Germany. In fact, the decline of ISIL in Syria and Iraq appears to be causing it to shift to tactics that we've seen before, an even greater emphasis on encouraging high-profile terrorist attacks, including in the United States. As always, our military, diplomatic, intelligence, homeland security, and law enforcement professionals are working around the clock with other countries and with communities here at home to share information and prevent such attacks. And over the years, they've prevented many. But as we've seen, it is still very difficult to detect and prevent lone actors or small cells of terrorists who are determined to kill the innocent and are willing to die. And that's why, as we discussed today, we're going to keep going after ISIL aggressively across every front of this campaign. Our air campaign continues to hammer ISIL targets. More than 14,000 strikes so far, more than 100,000 sorties, including those hitting the ISIL core in Raqqa and in Mosul. And in stark contrast to ISIL, which uses civilians as human shields, America's armed forces will continue to do everything in our power to avoid civilian casualties. With our extraordinary technology, we're conducting the most precise air campaign in history. After all, it is the innocent civilians of Syria and Iraq who are suffering the most and who need to be saved from ISIL's terror. And so when there are allegations of civilian casualties, we take them very seriously. We work to find the facts, to be transparent, and to hold ourselves accountable for doing better in the future. We continue to take out senior ISIL leaders and commanders. This includes ISIL's Deputy Minister of War, Bassem Muhammad al-Bajari, the top commander in Mosul, Hatim Talib al-Hamdani, and in yet another significant loss for ISIL, its Minister of War, Umar al-Shishani. None of ISIL's leaders are safe, and we're going to keep going after them. On the ground in Iraq, local forces keep pushing ISIL back. In a major success, Iraqi forces, with coalition support, finally liberated Fallujah. Now they're clearing ISIL fighters from more areas up the Euphrates Valley, and Iraqi forces retook the strategic air base at Qayyarah, just 40 miles from Mosul, now the last major ISIL stronghold in Iraq. Given the success, the additional 560 U.S. support personnel that I ordered to Iraq last month will help turn this base into a logistical hub and launch pad for Iraqi forces as they push into Mosul. Meanwhile, in Syria, a coalition of local forces backed by our special operations forces and airstrikes continues to take the fight to ISIL as well. The coalition is fighting its way into the town of Manbij, a gateway for ISIL fighters coming in and terrorists heading out to attack Europe, which is why ISIL is fighting hard to hold it. As ISIL is beaten back, we're gaining vast amounts of intelligence, thousands of documents, thumb drives, digital files, which we will use to keep destroying ISIL's networks and stop foreign fighters. We also continue to intensify our efforts against al-Qaeda in Syria, which, no matter what name it calls itself, cannot be allowed to maintain a safe haven to train and plot attacks against us. I do want to step back and note the broader progress that has been made in this campaign so far. 2 years ago, ISIL was racing across Iraq to the outskirts of Baghdad itself, and to many observers, ISIL looked invincible. Since then, in Iraq, ISIL has lost at the Manbij Dam, at Tikrit, at Beji, at Sinjar, at Ramadi, at Hit, at Rutbah, and now Fallujah. In Syria, ISIL's lost at Kobani and Tel Abyad, and the Tishrin Dam and al-Shaddadi. ISIL has lost territory across vast stretches of the border with Turkey and almost all major transit routes into Raqqa. And in both Iraq and Syria, ISIL has not been able to reclaim any significant territory that they have lost. So I want to repeat, ISIL has not had a major successful offensive operation in either Syria or Iraq in a full year. Even ISIL's leaders know they're going to keep losing. In their message to followers, they're increasingly acknowledging that they may lose Mosul and Raqqa, and ISIL is right. They will lose them. And we'll keep hitting them and pushing them back and driving them out until they do. In other words, ISIL turns out not to be invincible. They're, in fact, inevitably going to be defeated. But we do recognize at the same time that the situation is complex, and this cannot be solved by military force alone. That's why last month the United States and countries around the world pledged more than $2 billion in new funds to help Iraqis stabilize and rebuild their communities. It's why we're working with Iraq so that the military campaign to liberate Mosul is matched with humanitarian and political efforts to protect civilians and promote inclusive governance and development, so ISIL cannot return by exploiting divisions or new grievances. In Syria, as I've repeatedly said, defeating ISIL and al-Qaeda requires an end to the civil war and the Assad regime's brutality against the Syrian people, which pushes people into the arms of extremists. The regime and its allies continue to violate the cessation of hostilities, including with vicious attacks on defenseless civilians, medieval sieges against cities like Aleppo, and blocking food from reaching families that are starving. It is deplorable, and the depravity of the Syrian regime has rightly earned the condemnation of the world. Russia's direct involvement in these actions over the last several weeks raises very serious questions about their commitment to pulling the situation back from the brink. The U.S. remains prepared to work with Russia to try to reduce the violence and strengthen our efforts against ISIL and al-Qaeda in Syria. But so far, Russia has failed to take the necessary steps. Given the deteriorating situation, it is time for Russia to show that it is serious about pursuing these objectives. Beyond Syria and Iraq, we'll keep working with allies and partners to go after ISIL wherever it tries to spread. At the request of Libya's Government of National Accord, we are conducting strikes in support of government-aligned forces as they fight to retake Sirte from ISIL, and we will continue to support the government's efforts to secure their country. In Afghanistan, one of the reasons that I decided to largely maintain our current force posture was so that we could keep eliminating ISIL's presence there. And we delivered another blow last month when we took out a top ISIL leader in Afghanistan, Umar Khalifa. Finally, it should be clear by now, and no one knows this better than our military leaders, that even as we need to crush ISIL on the battlefield, their military defeat will not be enough. So long as their twisted ideology persists and drives people to violence, then groups like ISIL will keep emerging, and the international community will continue to be at risk in getting sucked into the kind of global whack-a-mole where we're always reacting to the latest threat or lone actor. And that's why we're also working to counter violent extremism more broadly, including the social, economic, and political factors that help fuel groups like ISIL and al-Qaeda in the first place. Nothing will do more to discredit ISIL and its phony claims to being a caliphate than when it loses its base in Raqqa and in Mosul. And we're going to keep working with partners, including Muslim countries and communities, especially online, to expose ISIL for what they are: murderers who kill innocent people, including Muslim families and children as they break their Ramadan fast, and who set off bombs in Medina near the Prophet's Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam. Moreover, we refuse to let terrorists and voices of division undermine the unity and the values of diversity and pluralism that keep our nation strong. One of the reasons that America's armed forces are the best in the world is because we draw on the skills and the talents of all of our citizens, from all backgrounds and faiths, including patriotic Muslim Americans who risk and give their lives for our freedom. And I think the entire world was inspired this past Sunday when Muslims across France joined their Catholic neighbors at Mass and, in a moving display of solidarity, prayed together. The greeting they extended to each other has to be the message we echo in all of our countries and all of our communities. Peace be with you, and also with you. Now, before I take some questions, I also want to say a few words on another topic. As our public health experts have been warning for some time, we are now seeing the first locally transmitted cases of the Zika virus by mosquitoes in the continental United States. This was predicted and predictable. So far, we've seen 15 cases in the Miami area. We're taking this extremely seriously. Our CDC experts are on the ground working shoulder to shoulder with Florida health authorities. There is a very aggressive effort underway to control mosquitoes there, and pregnant women have been urged to stay away from the particular neighborhood that we're focused on. We'll keep working as one team, federal, state, and local, to try to slow and limit the spread of the virus. I do want to be very clear, though. Our public health experts do not expect to see the kind of widespread outbreaks of Zika here that we've seen in Brazil or in Puerto Rico. The kind of mosquitoes that are most likely to carry Zika are limited to certain regions of our country. But we cannot be complacent because we do expect to see more Zika cases. And even though the symptoms for most people are mild, many may never even know that they have it, we've seen that the complications for pregnant women and their babies can be severe. So I again want to encourage every American to learn what they can do to help stop Zika by going to cdc.gov. In addition, Congress needs to do its job. Fighting Zika costs money. Helping Puerto Rico deal with its Zika crisis costs money. Research into new vaccines. And by the way, NIH just announced the first clinical trials in humans. That costs money. And that's why my administration proposed an urgent request for more funding back in February. Not only did the Republican-led Congress not pass our request, they worked to cut it. And then they left for summer recess without passing any new funds for the fight against Zika. Meanwhile, our experts at the NIH and CDC, the folks on the front lines, have been doing their best in making do by moving funds from other areas. But now the money that we need to fight Zika is rapidly running out. The situation is getting critical. For instance, without sufficient funding, NIH clinical trials, and the possibilities of a vaccine, which is well within reach, could be delayed. So this is not the time for politics. More than 40 U.S. service members have now contracted Zika overseas. In 50 U.S. states, we know of more than 1,800 cases of Zika connected to travel to infected areas, and that includes nearly 500 pregnant women. Zika is now present in almost every part of Puerto Rico, and now we have the first local transmission in Florida, and there will certainly be more. And meanwhile, Congress is on a summer recess. A lot of folks talk about protecting Americans from threats. Well, Zika is a serious threat to Americans, especially babies, right now. So once again, I want to urge the American people to call their members of Congress and tell them to do their job. Deal with this threat, help protect the American people from Zika. With that, I'm going to take some questions. I'm going to start with someone who just assumed the second most powerful office in the land, Jeff Mason, the New Correspondents Association president, also from Reuters. Jeff.
Thank you, sir. Hardly powerful. And happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
As Islamic State loses territory, you and other officials have said that it is becoming a more traditional terrorist group. Are you satisfied that the United States and its allies have shifted strategy sufficiently to address that change? And secondly, given your comments this week about Donald Trump's volatility and lack of fitness to be president, are you concerned that he will be receiving security briefings about ISIS and other sensitive national security issues?
Okay. I'm never satisfied with our response, because if you're satisfied, that means the problem's solved, and it's not. So we just spent a couple hours meeting with my top national security folks to look at what more can be done. It is absolutely necessary for us to defeat ISIL in Iraq and Syria. It is not sufficient, but it is necessary, because so long as they have those bases, they can use their propaganda to suggest that somehow there's still some caliphate being born, and that can insinuate itself then in the minds of folks who may be willing to travel there or carry out terrorist attacks. It's also destabilizing for countries in the region at a time when the region's already unstable. So, I am pleased with the progress that we've made on the ground in Iraq and Syria. We're far from freeing Mosul and Raqqa, but what we've shown is that when it comes to conventional fights, ISIL can be beaten with partners on the ground, so long as they've got the support from coalition forces that we've been providing. In the meantime, though, you're seeing ISIL carry out external terrorist acts. And they've learned something. They've adapted from al-Qaeda, which had a much more centralized operation and tried to plan very elaborate attacks. And what ISIL has figured out is that if they can convince a handful of people, or even one person, to carry out an attack on a subway or at a parade or some other public venue and kill scores of people as opposed to thousands of people, it still creates the kinds of fear and concern that elevates their profile. So in some ways, rooting out these networks for smaller, less complicated attacks is tougher because it doesn't require as many resources on their part or preparation. But it does mean that we've got to do even more to generate the intelligence and to work with our partners in order to degrade those networks. And the fact is that those networks will probably sustain themselves even after ISIL is defeated in Raqqa and Mosul. But what we've learned from our efforts to defeat al-Qaeda is that if we stay on it, our intelligence gets better, and we adapt as well. And eventually, we will dismantle these networks also. This is part of the reason why, however, it is so important for us to keep our eye on the ball and not panic, not succumb to fear, because ISIL can't defeat the United States of America or our NATO partners. We can defeat ourselves, though, if we make bad decisions. And we have to understand that as painful and as tragic as these attacks are, that we are going to keep on grinding away, preventing them wherever we can, using a whole government effort to knock down their propaganda, to disrupt their networks, to take their key operatives off the battlefield, and that eventually we will win. But if we start making bad decisions, indiscriminately killing civilians, for example, in some of these areas, instituting offensive religious tests on who can enter the country, those kinds of strategies can end up backfiring. Because in order for us to ultimately win this fight, we cannot frame this as a clash of civilizations between the West and Islam. That plays exactly into the hands of ISIL and the perversions, the perverse interpretations of Islam that they're putting forward. As far as Mr. Trump, we are going to go by the law, which is that both the tradition and the law, that if somebody's the nominee, the Republican nominee for president, they need to get a security briefing so that if they were to win, they are not starting from scratch in terms of being prepared for this office. And I'm not going to go into the details of the nature of the security briefings that both candidates receive. What I will say is that they have been told these are classified briefings, and if they want to be president, they got to start acting like president, and that means being able to receive these briefings and not spread them around.
Are you worried about that?
Well, I think I've said enough on that. Mary Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. President. What is your response to critics who say the $400 million in cash that you sent to Iran was a ransom payment? Was it really simply a pure coincidence that a sum that was a payment that was held up for almost 4 decades was suddenly sent at the exact same time that the American prisoners were released? And can you assure the American people that none of that money went to support terrorism?
Okay. It's been interesting to watch this story surface. Some of you may recall, we announced these payments in January, many months ago. There wasn't a secret. We announced them to all of you. Josh did a briefing on them. This wasn't some nefarious deal. And at the time, we explained that Iran had pressed a claim before an international tribunal about them recovering money of theirs that we had frozen, that as a consequence of its working its way through the international tribunal, it was the assessment of our lawyers that we were now at a point where there was significant litigation risk and we could end up costing ourselves billions of dollars. It was their advice and suggestion that we settle. And that's what these payments represent. And it wasn't a secret. We were completely open with everybody about it, and it's interesting to me how suddenly this became a story again. That's point number one. Point number two, we do not pay ransom for hostages. We've got a number of Americans being held all around the world. And I meet with their families, and it is heartbreaking. And we have stood up an entire section of interagency experts who devote all their time to working with these families to get these Americans out. But those families know that we have a policy that we don't pay ransom. And the notion that we would somehow start now in this high-profile way and announce it to the world, even as we're looking into the faces of other hostage families whose loved ones are being held hostage, and say to them that we don't pay ransom, defies logic. So that's point number two. We do not pay ransom. We didn't here, and we won't in the future. Precisely because if we did, then we would start encouraging Americans to be targeted, much in the same way that some countries that do pay ransom end up having a lot more of their citizens being taken by various groups. Point number three is that the timing of this was in fact dictated by the fact that as a consequence of us negotiating around the nuclear deal, we actually had diplomatic negotiations and conversations with Iran for the first time in several decades. So the issue is not so much that it was a coincidence as it is that we were able to have a direct discussion. John Kerry could meet with the foreign minister, which meant that our ability to clear accounts on a number of different issues at the same time converged. And it was important for us to take advantage of that opportunity both to deal with this litigation risk that had been raised. It was important for us to make sure that we finished the job on the Iran nuclear deal, and since we were in a conversation with them, it was important for us to be able to push them hard in getting these Americans out. And let me make a final point on this. It's now been well over a year since the agreement with Iran to stop its nuclear program was signed. And by all accounts, it has worked exactly the way we said it was going to work. You'll recall that there were all these horror stories about how Iran was going to cheat and this wasn't going to work, and Iran was going to get $150 billion to finance terrorism and all these kinds of scenarios. And none of them have come to pass. And it's not just the assessment of our intelligence community, it's the assessment of the Israeli military and intelligence community, the country that was most opposed to this deal, that acknowledges this has been a game changer and that Iran has abided by the deal and that they no longer have the sort of short-term breakout capacity that would allow them to develop nuclear weapons. So what I'm interested in is if there's some news to be made, why not have some of these folks who were predicting disaster say, you know what, this thing actually worked? Now, that would be a shock. That would be impressive. If some of these folks who had said the sky is falling suddenly said, you know what, we were wrong, and we are glad that Iran no longer has the capacity to break out in short term and develop a nuclear weapon. But of course that wasn't going to happen. Instead, what we have is the manufacturing of outrage in a story that we disclosed in January. And the only bit of news that is relevant on this is the fact that we paid cash. Which brings me to my last point. The reason that we had to give them cash is precisely because we are so strict in maintaining sanctions, and we do not have a banking relationship with Iran, that we couldn't send them a check. And we could not wire the money. And it is not at all clear to me why it is that cash, as opposed to a check or a wire transfer, has made this into a new story. You know, maybe because it kind of feels like some spy novel or, you know, some crime novel, because cash was exchanged. The reason cash was exchanged is because we don't have a banking relationship with Iran, which is precisely part of the pressure that we were able to apply to them so that they would ship a whole bunch of nuclear material out and close down a bunch of facilities that, as I remember, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, was people's top fear and priority, that we make sure Iran doesn't have breakout nuclear capacity. They don't. This worked. Josh Lederman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Repeatedly now, Donald Trump has said that this election will be rigged against him, challenging really the core foundation of our democratic system. Can you promise the American people that this election will be conducted in a fair way? And are you worried that comments like his could erode the public's faith in the outcome of the election? And if he does win, given that you've just declared him unfit, what will you say to the American people?
Well, at the end of the day, it's the American people's decision. I have one vote. I have the same vote you do. I have the same vote that all the voters who are eligible all across the country have. I've offered my opinion, but ultimately it's the American people's decision to make collectively. And if somebody wins the election and they are president, then my constitutional responsibility is to peacefully transfer power to that individual and do everything I can to help them succeed. It is... I don't even really know where to start on answering this question. Of course the elections will not be rigged. What does that mean? The federal government doesn't run the election process. States and cities and communities all across the country, they're the ones who set up the voting systems and the voting booths. And if Mr. Trump is suggesting that there is a conspiracy theory that is being propagated across the country, including in places like Texas, where typically it's not Democrats who are in charge of voting booths, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense, and I don't think anybody would take that seriously. Now, we do take seriously, as we always do, our responsibilities to monitor and preserve the integrity of the voting process. If we see signs that a voting machine or system is vulnerable to hacking, then we inform those local authorities who are running the elections that they need to be careful. If we see jurisdictions that are violating federal laws in terms of equal access and aren't providing rants for disabled voters or are discriminating in some fashion or are otherwise violating civil rights laws, then the Justice Department will come in and take care of that. But this will be an election like every other election. And, you know, I think all of us at some points in our lives have played sports or maybe just played in a schoolyard or a sandbox, and sometimes folks, if they lose, they start complaining that they got cheated. But I've never heard of somebody complaining about being cheated before the game was over or before the scores even tallied. So my suggestion would be, you know, go out there and try to win the election. If Mr. Trump is up 10 or 15 points on Election Day and ends up losing, then, you know, maybe he can raise some questions. That doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. Barbara Scott.
All right.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Christine Johnson. You've been listening to President Obama address a room full of reporters discussing the situation with ISIS, how America is combating terrorism, and also he touched on the $400 million that was exchanged with Iran. CBS Evening News will have much more on this a bit later. In the meantime,